Welcome to the Positive Thought Podcast. I'm your host, Nabil. Happy to be joined today by Nadir. Nadir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. So today I figured, we'd stay on topic of what's been happening, which is obviously the COVID-19 emergency, the pandemic, but look at it from a perspective of, the economy, because a lot of people are talking about that. So now just tell me a little bit about, has there been any economic impacts in your life with what's been happening around the world?
Yeah, it's impacted a lot of people in a lot of different ways. For myself, my work, it was commission-based, so therefore there's no business now, so it impacts you personally. There's a lot of stores, small businesses that no longer operate that are now having to discount heavily their foods even, just so people will order it online.
Yeah, I think people are having to adjust. Businesses are having to adjust to this new reality of how things are going to operate. How are they going to be sustainable, right? You mentioned that your job is commission based. How are you handling that? Are you going to work? Are you working from home? Like, what's your work situation like?
So we're not going to work as we're not considered an essential, so we're shut down. What we do is, that's really important to understand that you're still, just because your work is not considered essential, that there's still trainings you can do. There's ways you can grow yourself. So we've been doing a lot of, online video training sessions, honing our skills, making sure that we understand the importance of keeping busy, keeping your mind stimulated during this time and not just falling into a rut of some sorts. Because it does feel like sometimes that nothing is happening, but right now it's the best time to challenge yourself in terms of your intelligence, grow your curiosity,
I think the fact that we have a little bit more time to spend by ourselves, to spend at home, definitely gives you an opportunity to invest that time into something positive, something that you might have been putting off. So, with regards to what have you been spending your time with? What have you been doing?
So for myself, and again, that's not for everybody, I do like seeing the impact that this is happening on the world and understanding that, some countries are handling it better than others. Canada happens to be one of the better countries. And I'm really thankful to be here. And they're really well equipped in a sense where you have stimulus package going directly towards the citizens and the residents of Canada. They're buying off mortgages, so they can give you 6 months free of mortgage relief. They're trying to give you $2,000 a month for those who qualify. Like I said, this is a time where the economy is taking a hit, and it's a time when the economy will continue to take a hit. But remember, we will all go back to work, and when we do go back to work, we'll have a surge in economic activity, which will in turn create more jobs. So even if you've been impacted, you lose your job, you work at a small business, they can't afford it. Once life resumes, that same small business, they'll need employees again. And I'm sure if you did get impacted, it's not because of lack of skill, it's just a lack of monetary. So everything will return back to normal. We just have to keep going, social distancing for as long as necessary, and make sure we stop the spread.
Right. How much of this motivation do you think people can use about what is hopeful in the future of things, sort of resuming, or opportunities or more opportunities presenting themselves? Do you find that people are, when they get laid off or when they're at home, that they're sort of questioning their self-worth, because being laid off, regardless of the situation, is never a pleasant experience. In your experience, are you finding, in either people or what's been happening around the world, of how have people been dealing with just not having a job?
So in terms of self-worth, yeah, absolutely, people tie their own personalities to their jobs. What you bring to the table does define who you are in a sense. And now people are now having to rely on things like employment insurance or the government assistance program, which is something I'm sure a lot of people never thought they would. But unlike other circumstances, this is a pandemic. It's global. I think at some level, a lot of people do understand that it's not based on what they're done or what they're doing, because there's nothing they could do to have a job at this point. It's just nothing is open. Everything is shut down. So I think it as long as you keep it in perspective, and a lot of people have, they realize that it's not their actions that have caused their inability to work right now and collecting employment insurance. It's the fact that, hey, the world needs to now isolate itself. We're doing our part. And I think a lot of people are taking pride in the fact that they're staying home. They're not going out. They're not participating in certain things. Some people are. And you know what? And we're speaking out against those people who have been breaking the isolation policy. So I think there's a lot of communal things going on right now.
Yeah, I think this, what you mentioned reminds me of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? So, in the hierarchy of needs, like safety, shelter is primary, and what comes after that is the sense of belonging, the sense of self-worth. At the very top of the hierarchy of needs is self-actualization, the ability to know oneself truly. But if we're not feeling safe, which is what the coronavirus situation is making us feel with the spread, then we have to have our immediate needs met. But I think sometimes we forget our own privilege. And so you'll have people who have been working maybe sometimes in positions that are quite valued in society, and as a result of the economy sort of coming to a halt, they might have been laid off. So their hierarchy of needs, they might still feel a sense of belonging and still feel a sense of privilege, but they don't realize that it's coming at a cost of their safety. And I think this is a really important time for people to reinvest and re-acknowledge that, our safety is the primary concern. And then once a society feels safe, can it look to rebuild itself? And we have to understand that just because we're not used to feeling threatened of our safety doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need to take that into consideration, because there's so many vulnerable people whose safety is really at risk by us going out and participating in social and communal activities, and not social distancing, right? I know your work in its nature was very interactive with people. You're used to talking to many people in a particular day. Do you find yourself communicating with a lot of people, a lot of your friends, or how are you coping with the lack of communication that happens within people?
I mean, the number of phone calls that I take now has gone up, and the length of that call is a lot longer. So I'm glad I have an unlimited plan at this point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I remember a time when it wasn't. But I just want to go back to your previous point of self-actualization and someone of a more important, like a top tier executive or even a mid tier executive. The whole idea is, I think what this pandemic has done is once you look at yourself eternally, you realize that, hey, you know what? Yeah, you had a job that people respected, but right now, and rightfully so, we've acknowledged and we have been giving credit to the low level employees, the ones that make the minimum wage. And I feel like a lot of times we ignore them, but now you realize how essential they truly are. And now a lot of places are paying their minimum wage employees well above that. And people were against $15 an hour are now saying, hey, they should make 20, because you understand the importance that, hey, you know what, everyone serves a purpose, and without those employees, the higher level executives won't have a job, because you do need functions in all levels of a business, and you cannot just underestimate and undervalue other people's work. So I think a lot of people now, and you see these posts, nurses have never gotten more praise than they ever have, and rightfully so. They put themselves on the front lines, and they're willing to, just isolate themselves outside of work. They don't get to see their families. So, and I think people are now realizing and appreciating that, hey, based on the economy, it stems from the top all the way to the bottom.
Right. I think you actually brought up a really good point in within this economy now, like who are the most coveted or most cherished workers, right? Who are the labor market, or the section of the labor market that is so much more valued now? And when you think of people working at grocery stores, you're absolutely right. They are literally saving the economy. They're putting their lives at risk to ensure that people like myself and you and everybody else has groceries and it's in a safe environment. And I think it's so relevant, right? How if at this moment the $15 an hour, that seems almost trivial, because
Correct.
they're such an essential service right now. The same thing goes to nurses and doctors. Obviously, that's a respected position, and they do have value in society, but you can see how much more of their value is. So it's almost like when you look at essential services, sometimes we overlook and we underestimate the value that they have. And now we're starting to see, like, even a grocery store staff person who works there, like, they're important and they're valued. How do you see this transitioning when life resumes back to normal? Do you think we're going to be as appreciative, or is that going to, the level of appreciation we have right now? How do we validate them, compensate them, acknowledge them, and give them the treatment that they deserve?
So, in all honesty, I think it'll continue on, not maybe to the extent that we're seeing it now. When life returns to normal, we do tend to have a recency bias in society, but I think that recency bias will decrease. You won't. It won't be about what have you done for me now, because we'll talk about this for many many years. You know, our kids, our grandkids, everyone will know this is a. It's not a minor event that happened. The world shut down. So I think at some level we'll keep this trend alive. We'll realize that, hey, you know what? And not only that, when you have kids or you're sending your kids to the grocery store to work as a cashier, you'll be like, hey son, take pride in that. That's where you're gonna learn. Whereas before it's just like, well, it's just a part-time job for you to know what the value of money is. But now you'll be like, you'll know what the value of hard work is, and respected work. And I think that's the stigma will be gone. I think the stigma will be. I mean, some people will always obviously have it no matter when, but majority of the people, the stigma will be gone. Everyone will respect other positions. Um, that might not necessarily contribute to, like you may need two jobs, but they'll be like the two jobs you're doing before. You may not have respect. Now you're like, I respect everything you do because you needed to do those two jobs for us to have the things we have right now. And I think that's where we're realizing how many things that we have in our lives are dependent on the minimum wage workers. And I think that will, it as you know, the millennial crowd is already more progressive, and they have an idea behind the youth and how they want to see more progressive values. And I think they're just going to be spreading this story. And I think the generations to come it'll change for the better. And I think more respect will be given to a lot more people.
Right. And is respect in this situation a fair compensation, a fair wage, along with the recognition that socially that this is an important role that people play, or is it going to be a little bit more tokenized, where you appreciate what it is? How does real change come about so that economy is more balanced?
Initially, I think it'll be that, depending on the political fraction you fall on, some will ask for a higher minimum wage than others, but I think you'll have citizens' approval a lot higher for higher minimum wages. Whereas before, we were split. People weren't sure that they deserved it, right? That McDonald's employee did not deserve it. And now they're like, oh man, thank you for being open. Thank you for coming to work. Because it is, something people need. So I think the opinions in polling will go up, and politicians will cater to that. How much it goes up will be dependent now, but nobody will question that whether 14 or 15 or $16 is too much for them. Because the livable wage, now that people don't have a wage, they'll understand what it means to work on really bare minimum income coming in, because you can't pay your mortgage. You can't even get a mortgage if you wanted a house. You can't get paying your rent. If you were paying rent, you can't even cover that with the $2,000 is nice, but it's nice with if they were to do rent freezes or if they were to stop your mortgages. But if you have to pay those, then it's nothing. And I think people recognize that at this point, and I think it'll pass down. And I think at some level, it won't be a matter of is what's fair compensation. The difference will be on some will want more, some will want less. And what's the answer? I don't know, but that'll be when it happens.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, right? So almost the baseline here is an understanding that maybe this is a shared experience between everybody in society to know what does it feel like to have a pinch of finances, right? Where finances are tight, and understand almost people who might not have the privileges that you have, whether it's your position, your education, your life experiences, how difficult it is for individuals in that precarious positions to sort of move forward with paying rent, finding housing, and things like that. I guess it gives you greater appreciation from living in a welfare state, right? You don't necessarily have to be a socialist to appreciate the fact that government oversight in certain capacities is hugely beneficial, and to have a system that takes care of the most vulnerable to those most privileged is a system that recognizes the inequities that live within it. Because if there wasn't that fallback welfare system in Canada right now, like I think we'd be in trouble. And the economy in itself would not be able to sustain itself. You need that type of support. So I think you're right. There will be varying opinions of what type of support that looks like and how that plays out. But I think if anything, it has taught us during this difficult situation is that safety is paramount, that identity is not connected to a role that a person plays in society or that it shouldn't be, and that people that are heroes today should be remembered for what they did today, for the sacrifices that they've made, for the essential services that they're providing. Nadir, thank you so much for being here today. I hope this was beneficial for you.
Thank you, and yes, it was.
Oh, awesome. This is the Positive Thought Podcast. Until next time.